Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're pulling back the curtain on a figure who's steered a really complex nation for decades now. Often shaping global headlines, but, frequently from behind this veil of perceived mystery. And despite his incredibly long time in power, this individual remains surprisingly, opaque to many outside his country. Yet his decisions, they echo across continents.
They really do. A major global figure.
We are, of course, talking about the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei. Now, you, our dedicated listener, you've given us this stack of really insightful sources. We've got Wikipedia, Britannica accounts, and our mission, like always, is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight.
Yeah.
We'll navigate the complexities, the controversies, maybe some surprising details of his life and leadership, all to help you become truly well-informed about this pivotal figure.
And it's a remarkable amount of material we have to work with here. These sources give us a really robust, factual account of his life and his, extensive leadership, which is exactly what we need for a deep, impartial exploration. So our objective for this deep dive is really to trace Khamenei's extraordinary journey. From his humble beginnings, deeply religious family, through the crucible of revolution and war, right up to his current pretty much unparalleled position as supreme leader.
Yeah, unparalleled is the word.
We want to unravel his intricate political and religious philosophy and really try to understand the profound impact he's had, not just on Iran, but the wider Middle East too. And this isn't just about, listing events. It's about digging into why these things matter, the forces at play, and always we'll stick strictly to the facts presented in your sources. That's the commitment.
Absolutely. Sticking to the sources.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Who is the man behind the title, the supreme leader holding this immense sway over Iran's destiny? Where did Ali Khamenei's story actually begin?
Well, the sources tell us he was born April 19th, 1939 in Mashhad.
Mashhad. And that's not just any city, is it? It's got deep religious significance.
Precisely. It's a spiritual heartland for Twelver Shia Muslims. It's the burial place of the 8th Imam Reza. So yeah, it's a hugely important center for pilgrimage, for scholarship. It sets a certain tone right from the start.
Okay. And his family, what was his upbringing like?
He was the second of 8 children, born into a family that the sources describe as having modest means, but being profoundly pious. Very religious home.
And his father, Javad Khamenei, he wasn't just religious, he was a scholar himself.
That's right, an alim and a mujtahid. Now, for listeners maybe not familiar, an alim is an Islamic law scholar, and a mujtahid is a highly respected religious authority, someone qualified to independently interpret Islamic law.
So it's a serious intellectual and religious environment from day one.
Absolutely. Deep religious learning, scholarly interpretation, it was just woven into the fabric of daily life. His mother, Khadija Mirdamadi, was Persian from Yazd, while his father was ethnic Azerbaijani from Khamenei.
Interesting mix. Reflects Iran itself, really.
It does. Yeah. And there's also this link in their ancestry to the Aftasi Sayyids, descendants of the 4th Shia Imam. That establishes a venerable lineage connecting him to the Prophet Muhammad's family, which is significant in Shia Islam.
Definitely adds another layer. Okay, so what about his education? It started young, I gather.
Very young. Quran lessons at age 4 at a maktab, a traditional kind of religious school, then primary studies at Dar al-Talim Dainat, grounding him in that foundational religious knowledge early on.
And then the seminary. That seems like the real turning point.
It really was. He began seminary studies in Mashhad, studying under some influential figures, Shi Hashim Qazvini, Ayatollah Milani, steeped him in classical Shia jurisprudence theology.
He even went to Najaf briefly in Iraq.
Yeah, in 1957. Najaf was, at the time, arguably the preeminent center of Shia scholarship globally, a rival to Qom in Iran. But he returned pretty quickly, apparently due to his father's wishes.
Okay, but the big move was to Qom in 58.
Crucial development, yes. Qom would become this epicenter of revolutionary thought. And there he studied under some massive figures. Sayyid Hossein Borjerdi, a grand Ayatollah of huge stature.
And Khomeini.
And crucially, Ruhollah Khomeini, the future architect of the whole Islamic Revolution. This period, you just can't overstate its importance. Not just for his religious learning, but for his political awakening.
Right.
And what's genuinely fascinating here, a really critical insight from the sources, is how that upbringing, poor but religious, laid such a strong ideological groundwork.
Mm-hmm.
This wasn't just an academic thing for Khamenei. The sources are pretty clear. His early involvement, even during seminary, was much more political than purely religious scholarship for its own sake.
So he was engaged from the start.
Definitely. His exposure to Khomeini in Qom wasn't just theological lectures. It instilled this profound commitment to revolutionary ideals, especially Velayat-e Faqih governance by the religious jurists.
That concept again.
So, absolutely central. And this isn't just a footnote. It's key to understanding his later role. This early immersion in political activism, combined with the rigorous theological studies, it really positioned him uniquely for that dual role he'd later play, religious and political leader. It forged his identity.
When you think about those early experiences, the modest background, the deep religious lineage, studying under Khomeini, how do you think that fundamentally shaped his worldview? What kind of leader does that background produce?
Well, it seems to produce someone deeply convinced of their righteous path, someone grounded in both scripture and political struggle. It likely instilled a profound sense of duty, maybe even destiny, and a deep skepticism towards secular power structures, like the Shah's regime he grew up under.
Yeah, it certainly seems like preparation for a life less ordinary, you could say.
Yeah.
Okay, so that brings us to his more active role. How did this young cleric become such a key figure in, well, one of the biggest revolutions of the 20th century?
It wasn't a quiet path, that's for sure. The sources show he was actively protesting against Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah, way back in 1963.
63. So really early on.
Yeah, and it came at a real personal cost. It shows his revolutionary zeal was building early. He was arrested, 6 times? By Savak, the Shah's secret police.
6 times. That's significant.
It is. An initial arrest in Bejan in 63 after he was basically on a preaching mission for Khomeini, spreading his message. Another time, 2 months in solitary confinement in Tehran in 64 after preaching against the Shah's policies in Kerman and Zahedan.
Solitary confinement, wow.
And the pressure just kept mounting. Eventually, he was exiled for 3 years to Iran-Shar, this remote town in the southeast, from 76 to 79.
Exile too, but it didn't stop him.
Apparently not. He returned to Mashhad mid-79, right when things were really boiling over. Civil unrest was peaking. Iran was on the absolute brink.
And during the revolution itself, the sources call him a key figure, a close confidant of Khomeini.
Absolutely unequivocal descriptions. It speaks volumes about his standing in that inner circle. His commitment was clear. He was part of the Islamic Revolutionary Council, that critical body Khomeini set up before he even returned to Iran to guide things.
Okay.
And in February 79, right after the Shah fled, he was a founding member of the Islamic Republican Party, the IRP. That party was instrumental in consolidating the new republic's power.
So he was right there building the new state's foundations. What about official posts early on?
He moved quickly into significant roles. Briefly, Vice Minister of National Defense, July to November 79, a critical job during that chaotic transition.
Mm-hmm.
Then supervisor of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC, which was rapidly becoming the revolution's main protector.
The IRGC. We'll definitely come back to them.
Oh, absolutely. And in 1980, a really crucial personal appointment from Khomeini himself. Tehran's Friday prayer imam, hugely visible, influential religious platform, shaping public discourse every week.
Had a political role, too, in the assembly.
Yes, Tehran representative in the Consultative Assembly, the parliament.
Right.
So political influence cemented there, too. But, this rapid rise, the central role, it wasn't without serious danger.
The assassination attempt.
Exactly. June 1981. Targeted at the Abu Thar Mosque. A brutal attack. And it left him with that paralyzed right arm, a visible consequence he carries to this day, always shaking hands with his left.
Permanent reminder. Must have solidified his image, though.
Immensely. That personal sacrifice really burnishes credentials as this dedicated defender of the Republic, endearing him to the base.
Okay.
And this period, it's just absolutely crucial for understanding Khamenei's political DNA. The arrests, the exile, especially the assassination attempt. These weren't just hardships, they were formative. They solidified his revolutionary credentials.
Right. Made him a symbol.
Totally. And they deeply ingrained his anti-Shah and, by extension, anti-Western views. Framing the world as this struggle against oppression, the sources consistently stress his close alliance with Khomeini, a close confidant, a protege. This loyalty, plus his early ardent push for Velayat-e Faqih governance by the jurists, as a pillar of the state that positioned him centrally in the new republic. He wasn't just in the revolution. He was an ideologue deeply committed to its core principles. The trials just hardened that resolve.
So looking back at those early trials, the close bond with Khomeini. How crucial do you think those were for his eventual rise? It feels like each challenge just pushed him further up the ladder.
I think they were indispensable. They
Yeah.
built his legitimacy, his network, his reputation for resilience and loyalty. In a revolutionary environment, those qualities are paramount. It wasn't just about theological rank. It was about proven commitment and survivability. He demonstrated both, repeatedly.
Okay, so that sets the stage for his move into the presidency. What did that mean for the Islamic Republic, which was still pretty new, facing huge threats?
Well, he takes on the presidency in October 1981, right after the previous two presidents were assassinated. So a moment of extreme crisis and instability.
He wins by a landslide, 97%.
An overwhelming mandate, yes. And it was significant. He became the first cleric to hold the office. A subtle shift from Khomeini's initial idea of keeping clerics out of the presidency to avoid, potential corruption taints.
Interesting. And he was reelected too.
Re-elected in 85 with 87%, shows continued support during a really tough time. And his inaugural address, he laid it out clearly, vowed to eliminate deviation, liberalism, and American-influenced leftists, a very firm line against perceived internal enemies.
Which connects to what the sources say about that period, state repression and terror.
Exactly. The early 80s were a brutal time of internal consolidation. Thousands of members of insurgent groups, especially the MEK, the People's Mujahideen, were killed. They'd initially supported the revolution, but then clashed violently with the new regime.
Executed by revolutionary courts.
Often, yes. A process that intensified during his presidency. It just shows the intense internal conflict, the ruthless consolidation of power happening then. The regime was determined to crush any opposition. And Khamenei, as president, was at the forefront, giving speeches supporting these harsh measures.
A grim picture. And all this happened against the backdrop of the Iran-Iraq War, right? That dominated his presidency.
Completely. That devastating war lasted the entire 1980s. He emerged as one of Iran's key leaders during that existential fight. And it's during this time he develops those close ties with the IRGC.
Right, the Revolutionary Guards again. Gaining power during the war?
Hugely significant power and influence. They became the primary military and security arm, crucial on the battlefield and for suppressing internal opposition, keeping the regime stable.
And he had views on the war's strategy, about not invading Iraq.
Yes, interestingly, after Iran pushed the Iraqi army out in 82, Khamenei argued against a counter-invasion into Iraq. He felt it would turn a war of liberation into one of conquest. He shared that view with Prime Minister Mir Hossein Mousavi,
who he'd later clash with dramatically in 2009.
Exactly, foreshadowing there. And he also got this reputation for being really hands-on, deeply interested in the military budget and administrative details. He understood the mechanics of power.
So the war itself, you called it a crucible. How did it shape the institutions, especially the IRGC?
Well, it was far more than just a military conflict. It profoundly shaped the IRGC's identity and reach, turned it into this formidable force permeating Iranian society. It cemented the IRGC's bond with the leadership, especially Khamenei.
Laid the groundwork for their later influence.
Absolutely. The war gave the IRGC the justification and the means to become this omnipresent force, economically, politically, socially, far beyond just military roles. It became essential for the revolution's survival and propagation, and Khamenei was central in nurturing that bond.
You can just imagine the pressure. Leading a nation at war, internal threats simmering. How does that forge allegiances and strategic thinking? It must have shaped the very core of the new Iran.
Without a doubt. It solidified a sense of embattlement, a need for unwavering loyalty, and the paramount importance of security institutions like the IRGC. It forged deep bonds between the political leadership and the military wings, built on shared sacrifice and survival. That experience defined the regime's character for decades.
Okay, so now we get to the really big question. The one that puzzles many observers. How does a president, not even a grand Ayatollah at the time, become the supreme leader? The highest authority, it seemed. Unexpected.
Deeply unexpected to many, yes. It defied the conventional religious hierarchy. The story starts in 1989. Khomeini's health is failing.
Right, and he dismisses Montazeri, who was the designated successor.
Exactly, a huge move. Instead, Khomeini signals, maybe indirectly but clearly, his preference for Khamenei. And crucially, Khomeini issues this letter. It fundamentally reinterprets the requirements for supreme leader. He stated that the traditional requirement of Marjat being a grand Ayatollah, a source of emulation for millions, wasn't strictly necessary. A pious mujtahid, basically a learned scholar approved by the assembly of experts, would suffice.
Wow, that's a massive theological and political shift.
Huge, and it strategically opened the door for Khamenei, who held a lower rank.
So the election process itself, by the assembly of experts after Khomeini died, was it straightforward?
Far from it. Intense debate. Initially, there was a strong push for a leadership council, collective leadership. Khamenei was even mentioned in proposals for this council.
Why council?
Supporters thought it would mean more unity, prevent too much power in one person, compensate for individual shortcomings. But opponents argued, individual leadership is more efficient, more decisive, more rooted in Islamic tradition.
And the council idea was rejected.
Decisively, 45 votes against, only about 24. After that, Khamenei was elected supreme leader on June 4th, 1989, got 60 out of 74 votes. Grand Ayatollah Ghani got the other 14.
But there was controversy about his qualifications.
Big controversy. At the time, he was a Hujjah al-Islam, respected, but mid-level, not a marja, which the original 1979 constitution technically required.
So, a constitutional problem right away.
Exactly. Raised legitimacy questions for some. There's even that leaked video, apparently from the time, showing Khamenei himself expressing reservations, suggesting he'd be a ceremonial leader, temporarily, acknowledging the gap.
How did they resolve that?
They amended the constitution. Swiftly. This critical amendment removed the marja requirement, emphasizing political and administrative skills instead. Then Khamenei was reconfirmed in August '89 with an even stronger vote, 60 out of 64. Cemented his position under the new rules.
Okay, that's quite the maneuver.
It really is an aha moment for understanding the system's adaptability. Or maybe, it's political pragmatism.
Right.
What it tells us is that this succession was less about rigid theology and more about political realities, strategic goals, and, crucially, Khomeini's clear preference and trust in Khamenei.
Khomeini really engineered it.
It seems so. Dismissing Montazeri, reinterpreting the Marja rule, masterstrokes of political engineering. That, plus amending the Constitution and rejecting the council model, it all concentrated power massively in the hands of the individual supreme leader.
Set the stage for Khamenei's long reign.
Exactly. It legitimized his authority despite the initial rank issue. It shows how the revolutionary system, while rooted in religion, is incredibly flexible. It can bend rules to ensure its survival and continuity.
So what does this whole intricate succession saga tell you about the power dynamics within Iran's system? Its adaptability seems key to its resilience.
Absolutely. It shows a system where political necessity and the will of the founding figure could override traditional religious or even constitutional norms when required. It prioritizes the survival and continuity of the revolutionary state above almost everything else. That flexibility is a defining trait.
Okay, so once he's in power, how does Khamenei go about consolidating that authority? It wasn't just handed to him on a plate, even after the election.
No, definitely not. Unlike Khomeini, who had this immense charisma and unique status as the revolution's founder, Khamenei had to build his power more structurally, more deliberately.
How did he do that?
Through networks. Cultivating personal ties, first, within the armed forces, solidifying their loyalty, then among the clerics. And also by administering major bonyads, those powerful religious endowments in key seminaries in Qom and Mashhad, placing his people strategically.
Building a base of support.
Exactly. And he systematically placed loyalists throughout Iran's major institutions, creating what critics call parallel structures.
Parallel structures, what does that mean?
Essentially, ways to exert his will directly, but also, crucially, to keep official bodies, the regular army, intelligence agencies, even parts of the judiciary relatively weak and dependent on him. Fragmenting power so no single institution could challenge him.
Clever in a way. Divide and rule.
Arguably, yes. And in his public messaging, he consistently hammers those core revolutionary themes. Justice, independence, self-sufficiency, Islamic government, and that resolute opposition to Israel and the United States.
But let's talk about democracy or transparency.
Much less, according to the sources. They highlight his resistance to figures like Rafsanjani, who tried to find a working relationship with the U.S., or Khatami, who pushed for a more democratic Islamic state. Khamenei clearly prioritized preserving the system as he defines it.
And his powers as supreme leader. They are vast, right?
Immense. He's head of state, commander-in-chief, final say on pretty much all major policies: economy, environment, foreign policy, national planning, everything.
Total control.
Direct or indirect control over all three branches: executive, legislative, judicial, plus the military, state media like IRIB. It's comprehensive.
How does he maintain that? 3 appointments.
Largely, yes. He appoints the key figures: commander of the army, commander of the IRGC, chief of staff, chief of police, head of IRI, chief justice, heads of the big boneyards, ensures loyalty at the top of all key levers of power.
And he influences elections, too. The Guardian Council.
Massively.
Yeah.
He appoints half the Guardian Council members. The chief justice, his appointee, selects the other half.
So he effectively controls the council.
Which means he controls who can even run for office. The Guardian Council vets all candidates for the Assembly of Experts, presidency, parliament. They disqualify thousands, look at 2004, 2020, 2021. Ensures conservative dominance. Predetermines outcomes, essentially.
And he can step in on laws directly.
Oh, yes. In 2000, he famously forbade Parliament from even debating a revision to the press law that might have allowed more freedom. Just said it was not legitimate. Ultimate veto power.
Okay, and then there's this whole other dimension, the financial empire. Satad.
Satad. The headquarters for executing the order of the Imam. This is a really opaque but incredibly powerful entity. That 2013 Reuters investigation estimated Khamenei controls, through Satad, something like a $95 billion financial empire.
95 billion. Largely unaccountable.
Largely unaccountable to Parliament or the public, yes. Reportedly built on a systematic seizure of thousands of properties from ordinary Iranians, minorities, Baha'is, business people, expats, often through questionable legal means.
And what's that wealth used for?
Critics argue it's used for political expedience, operating outside the budget, insulating him from factional fights, providing a huge pot for patronage, funding loyalists, maybe covert operations.
But the official Iranian line is different.
Completely different. They portray Satad as this vast charity foundation, funding infrastructure, creating jobs, aiding the poor, a benevolent institution serving the public, two very different narratives.
Right.
So this whole section, it really shows the intricate, deeply embedded web of his power, how it shifted from Khomeini's charisma to this highly institutionalized control.
And the justification is velayat faqih.
That's the theoretical underpinning for his absolute authority. Positions him as the deputy of the hidden imam, ideologically beyond earthly checks. His control over the Guardian Council is the linchpin, ensuring the Republican parts, like Parliament, stay subordinate.
And Satad adds that economic muscle.
Exactly. Practical economic power beyond the official state budget. Independent financial leverage. Patronage. It creates this parallel economy, reinforcing a parallel power structure, vital for his long-term survival and the system's resilience.
So if you're an observer trying to understand Iran, what does this multi-layered control, from religious doctrine to finance to military appointments, really mean for interpreting events? It sounds like a system incredibly centralized around one person.
It means that formal democratic processes, while they exist, operate under this overriding, unelected authority that can ultimately shape or veto outcomes. It suggests that understanding Khamenei's priorities, his network, and the institutions directly loyal to him, like the IRGC and Satad, is often more critical than just looking at elected officials or parliamentary debates. Power flows through multiple, sometimes hidden, channels.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift gears a bit. From domestic control to the international stage. How has Khamenei shaped Iran's nuclear ambitions and this whole issue around weapons of mass destruction?
Well, the sources show he's consistently supported Iran's nuclear program, but always framed it specifically for civilian use.
The energy argument.
Right. His stated rationale is pragmatic. Oil and gas reserves cannot last forever. Need alternative energy. And interestingly, beyond nuclear, he's actually backed scientific progress in other areas too. Allowed stem cell research, therapeutic cloning, that surprising openness to science, perhaps, within that conservative framework.
But the big international issue is the Fatwa, right? The religious edict against nuclear weapons.
Yes, that's a key element of Iran's public stance. He reportedly issued this fatwa stating that the production, stockpiling, and use of nuclear weapons was forbidden under Islam.
And Iran uses this internationally at the IAEA.
They do. Cited it back in 2005 in Vienna. His official website lists it as a formal fatwa on prohibition of weapons of mass destruction. So if you take it at face value, it's presented as this binding religious constraint.
But is it taken at face value? What's the debate around it?
Well, that's where it gets complicated. It's a real point of international discussion. The Iranian government presents it as sincere, immutable, but some international experts are skeptical.
Skeptical how?
They might question its existence, its precise wording, or whether a fatwa, even if real, could be changed later based on new circumstances or interpretations. Shia jurisprudence can be flexible. But then you have others, like the journalist Gareth Porter, who believe it is sincere and unlikely to change. They see it as a genuine religious conviction, acting as a real barrier to weaponization.
So, fundamental disagreement on its meaning and sincerity.
Exactly. And that nuance is crucial because it massively shapes how the world, especially the West, interprets Iran's intentions and its willingness to comply with non-proliferation. It's this complex mix of religion, geopolitics, and deep mistrust.
What about the nuclear deal, the JCPOA from 2015? What was his stance?
Publicly, he was always skeptical, expressed distrust of Western intentions frequently, but despite that skepticism, he did allow its implementation. A pragmatic acceptance, perhaps.
But then the U.S. pulled out in 2018.
And his stance hardened considerably after that. He flatly rejected renegotiating with the U.S. under duress. Instead, he backed this gradual breach of the deal's commitments, Iran incrementally exceeding the limits in response to U.S. sanctions.
Playing tit for tat.
Pretty much. And while he initially rebuffed Trump's requests for new talks to dismantle the program, calling it bullying, the sources note that negotiations did eventually restart indirectly with Oman mediating.
So, still willing to talk, but on their terms.
Suggests a careful calculation. Deterrence plus diplomacy. Willing to engage, but only from a position of perceived strength, not weakness.
It highlights that tension you made.
Exactly. Promoting civilian use, forbidding weapons via fatwa, but skeptical of deals, willing to breach them. It's all within that broader strategy of avoiding either confrontation or accommodation with the West.
A balancing act.
A continuous, delicate balancing act. Protecting sovereignty, advancing technology, asserting regional influence, but trying to avoid all-out war. This strategic ambiguity, the public religious ban, plus a robust program that keeps people guessing it's a hallmark of his approach, gives leverage and deniability.
So that idea of a religious fatwa dictating nuclear policy, how does that differ from how, say, secular powers approach arms control? It adds a whole different layer, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Secular approaches rely on treaties, verification regimes, mutual deterrence calculations based on rational self-interest. Introducing a religious edict adds a layer of moral or divine command, but also introduces questions about interpretation, sincerity, and potential change based on religious reasoning rather than purely strategic logic. It makes trust and verification arguably even more complex for external actors.
Yeah, much harder to verify a religious conviction. Okay, let's broaden that again. Khamenei's influence isn't just nuclear. He's seen as the architect of this major regional strategy, the axis of resistance.
Yes, his influence is huge regionally. The sources state clearly he has direct responsibility for foreign policy, with his own independent team reporting to him.
And the policy itself, what are the core principles?
Fundamentally, it's centered on Shia Islamism, exporting the ideals of the '79 revolution and opposing arrogant colonialist powers, mainly the U.S. and its allies. The Constitution even mandates supporting Muslims and the oppressed globally, provides that ideological justification.
And the axis of resistance is how this manifests.
Primarily, yes. Under Khamenei, Iran has cultivated and supported these non-state groups and coalitions across the region, intervening in conflicts Iraq, Syria, Yemen.
Who are the key players in this axis?
Key alliances include Hezbollah in Lebanon. The IRGC helped found them back in the 80s, still supplies and trains them. Hamas in Gaza, interestingly, a Sunni group, showing strategic interests can override sectarian lines. The Houthi movement in Yemen. Various Shia militant groups in Syria and Iraq.
And they're loyal to Khamenei.
Often, yes. They prioritize loyalty to Iran's supreme leader. They act as proxies, allowing Iran to project power and influence far beyond its borders without direct military involvement.
That proxy strategy seems key.
It's critical. Many of these alliances go way back, forged during or after the Iran-Iraq War. Shared ideals, strategic needs. The axis isn't just loose allies, it's a deliberate, sophisticated strategy.
Letting Iran project power without direct confrontation.
Exactly. Deter adversaries, challenge the status quo, complicate the security picture for the U.S. and Israel. By funding, training, arming these proxies, Iran gets influence and a degree of plausible deniability. It's a cost-effective, asymmetric way to project power and keep enemies off balance.
What about relations with the U.S. specifically? No formal ties since the hostage crisis.
None since 1980. And that animosity is a constant under Khamenei. He regularly repeats his resolute opposition, calls the U.S. the Great Satan. There's that reported quote, We need the United States as an enemy.
Why would he say that?
Perhaps the idea that the external enemy provides internal cohesion legitimizes the revolutionary government. He frequently accuses the U.S. of state terrorism, criticizes the U.S. definition of terrorism, especially regarding Palestinian groups.
And condemns specific U.S. actions.
Constantly. Predicted a trial for Bush over Iraq back in 2007, criticized the Libya intervention in 2011, accused the USAK of creating ISIS in 2014, accused the U.S. of starting the Ukraine war in 2022. The narrative is consistent, U.S. as the global antagonist.
It sounds like more than just rhetoric.
It feels like a foundational principle of Khomeinism, deep in Iran's political DNA. It serves multiple purposes. Internally, rallies support, provides a clear enemy, legitimizes the regime as anti-imperialist. Externally, underpins foreign policy, alliances with other anti-Western actors.
So the Great Satan narrative is constantly reinforced.
Through state media, education, official speeches, shapes the worldview, makes any real rapprochement incredibly difficult, despite occasional talks. The anti-American stance seems integral to the regime's identity.
And then there's Israel. Perhaps the most controversial aspects, his rhetoric is incredibly hard.
Extremely harsh, yes. Staunch opponent of Israel and Zionism. Called Israel a cancerous tumor that should be removed. A rabid dog. That tweet saying, "No cure for Israel, but its destruction," stated Israel will not exist in 25 years. Existential threats.
And support for Palestinian groups.
Robust support. He praised Hamas's October 7th attack, though denied direct Iranian involvement. Condemned Israel's Gaza response as genocide.
There's also the Holocaust denial accusations.
Yes, adding significantly to the controversy, called it a myth, an uncertain reality. Questioned how it happened. His website posted a denial video in 2016, praised known deniers. Fuels international outrage.
Leading to accusations of anti-Semitism, using Zionism as a cover.
Widespread accusations, yes. Critics argue he uses Zionism as a dog whistle for Jews, citing statements like, "Zionist capitalists were a plague for the whole world," seen as propagating classic anti-Semitic tropes under an anti-Zionist guise.
So how does this intense opposition to Israel, often spilling into alleged anti-Semitism, play out regionally and globally?
It's a really contentious point. On one hand, it positions Iran as the vanguard against perceived injustice in Palestine, resonating with parts of the Islamic world, bolstering his axis of resistance. On the other hand, the anti-Semitism accusations alienate potential allies, give critics powerful ammunition.
And recent events have tested this. The 2025 Iran-Israel conflict.
Exactly. The Israeli strikes on Iran, Iran's missile response, the weakening of allies like Hezbollah due to other conflicts. His hardline stance is facing severe tests. The effectiveness of the Axis strategy is under intense scrutiny, especially as the costs mount for his proxies.
What about recent geopolitical shifts? Iran moving closer to Russia and China?
Yes. Post-2018, as Western pressure grew, Iran pivoted more towards Russia and China. Supplying those Shahid drones to Russia for Ukraine was a major sign of this. Drew strong condemnation.
The axis of upheaval.
That's what some critics are calling it. An informal alignment, Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, all challenging the US-led global order.
So this is a strategic response.
Clearly. A response to international pressure, reaffirming Iran's commitment to challenging Western hegemony. Strengthening ties with non-Western powers reduces isolation, diversifies partnerships, helps bypass sanctions, pushes for a multipolar world where Iran has more room to maneuver. It's pragmatic adaptation, rooted in that core revolutionary principle of resistance.
So this whole web of alliances and antagonisms, built under Khamenei, how does it play out globally? What does it mean for international stability for you trying to understand these complex power dynamics?
It means the Middle East, and indeed global politics, remains incredibly volatile. Iran, under Khamenei's strategy, acts as a significant counterweight to U.S. influence, constantly challenging regional allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia, often through proxies. This creates persistent instability, but also prevents uncontested U.S. dominance. For an observer, it means understanding that events are rarely isolated. They're part of this larger geopolitical chess game, driven by deep ideological commitments and strategic calculations, with Khamenei as a central player directing Iran's moves.
Okay, so despite this iron grip, this extensive control, Khamenei's reign has also seen repeated waves of internal dissent, right? And often brutal repression. The facade isn't seamless.
Not at all. The Iranian public has repeatedly challenged the state's authority, often at great personal risk. There have been several major waves of protests during his leadership.
Which ones stand out?
Well, back in '94, the Qazvin protests, reportedly quite violent crackdowns, maybe 40 killed. Then the big student protests in 1999, challenging for more freedom.
In 2009, the Green Movement, that felt huge.
It was massive. Unprecedented defiance after the disputed election. People chanting death to the dictator, directly challenging Khamenei, ripping down his pictures. His response: fully backed Ahmadinejad, ordered severe crackdowns, many arrests, injuries, deaths.
And it didn't stop there. More recent protests.
No, we saw unrest linked to the economy in 2011-12, then again in 2017-18 and 2018-19. Khamenei publicly demanded harsh punishment for disruptors of economic security, framing it as sabotage.
Then 2019-20, the fuel price protests.
Met with an especially brutal response: the Mashhad massacre. Reports of security forces firing on unarmed protesters. Khamenei reportedly met officials, said rioters should be crushed, led to lashings, jail, deaths in custody.
Even the plane downing in 2020 sparked protests.
Yes, the tragic shooting down of the Ukrainian airliner. Thousands protested, some demanding his resignation. A rare direct challenge.
And then Mahsa Amini in 2022.
That ignited widespread, sustained demonstrations across the country, amplified so many grievances: subjugation of women, minority rights, the economy, prioritizing ideology over people's welfare. A really significant moment of national protest.
And the sources mentioned repression beyond protests, assassinations, targeting dissidents.
Yes, accusations of overseeing assassinations of exiled defectors, maybe 160 worldwide. Chilling reach within Iran. Heavy repression, killings of MEK members, targeting writers, intellectuals.
Journalists jailed for insulting Khamenei.
Routinely, often linked with blasphemy charges, effectively criminalizing dissent. Cases like Abbas Maroufi, Omid Reza Mir-Sayafi, who died in custody, Sina Deon. A clear pattern of suppressing opposition.
What's the regime's justification for this? How does Khamenei frame it?
Well, he consistently argues that human rights are a fundamental Islamic principle, one that precedes and differs from Western concepts. He often hits back with counter-accusations of Western hypocrisy, economic oppression, supporting despots.
Framing it as an ideological battle.
Exactly. Defending Islamic principles against Western interference and plots. It helps rationalize the surveillance, censorship, harsh punishments. Frames dissidents as foreign agents or deviants. A powerful narrative for control.
What about specific policies? Minorities, social freedoms, the Baha'i faith.
Considered a dangerous cult, officially banned. Khamenei approved legislation against them, ordered monitoring, severe suppression of religious freedom there.
Women's rights.
Vocal critic of activists and Sida, believes in gender segregation, sees gender equality as a Zionist plot to corrupt women's role. Advocates compulsory hijab to honor women, preserve the Islamic family structure.
Homosexual rights.
Believes homosexuality is a moral deprivation against Islamic teachings. But paradoxically, perhaps, he supported Khomeini's 1985 fatwa allowing sex reassignment surgery for gender dysphoria, a complex, specific interpretation of Islamic law there.
So these protests, especially the recent ones, they seem linked to the economy, but also broader issues.
Deeply connected to economic hardship, austerity, inflation, unemployment, that fuels discontent. But it broadens opposition beyond just political factions, includes wider segments disillusioned with the regime's ability to deliver welfare or basic freedoms.
And the regime's response? More security?
The tightening grip of security forces, the harsh crackdowns, willingness to use lethal force. It shows a determination to maintain control through coercion when ideology fails. It's this continuous, often violent cycle. Protest, repression, cracks in the facade of popular support.
So how does this persistent internal pressure and the methods used to quell it highlight that tension between the original revolutionary ideals of liberation, justice, and the realities of governance under Khamenei, where control often seems paramount?
It highlights a profound and enduring tension. The regime claims legitimacy based on revolutionary ideals and Islamic principles, but its survival often seems dependent on security forces and repression that contradict those ideals of justice and freedom for many Iranians. It's a constant struggle for the soul of the nation, with the leadership perpetually balancing public grievances against the imperative to maintain absolute authority and the revolutionary system itself.
Okay, so looking towards the end of this long reign, after more than 3 decades, Khamenei's legacy is obviously immense, complex, and the succession question looms large, doesn't it?
Hugely large. His tenure, 36 years, longest-serving head of state in the Middle East, second longest Iranian leader of the modern era after the Shah. He's described as that ruthless defender of Iran's revolution, someone who pragmatically navigated huge pressures to preserve the system Khomeini left him.
And his health. Constant rumors. He's 84 now.
Constant speculation, yes. Sources mention prostate surgery in 2014, reports of stage 4 prostate cancer in 2015, bowel obstruction surgery in 2022 that made him cancel meetings. It all underlines the precariousness, the inevitable reality of a looming succession, a defining moment for Iran.
And the succession picture itself has changed recently. Raisi's death.
Significantly, President Raisi's death in that helicopter crash in May 2024 removed one of the two widely perceived main contenders, a conservative cleric rising through the ranks,
Leaving.
his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, now widely considered the other main contender, which raises the prospect of a dynastic succession, something that would surely spark intense debate and power struggles within the establishment.
And the election of Pezeshkian as president after Raisi, what did that signal?
Many saw it as a pragmatic move by Khamenei, an attempt to boost the government's legitimacy after low election turnouts, maybe signal a willingness to re-engage with the West. Pezeshkian is seen as more moderate.
And he appointed Zarif, the JCPOA negotiator.
Yes, as VP for strategy, pointed towards a possible shift, maybe de-escalation. But then, almost immediately, those assassinations, Haniyeh in Tehran, Nasrallah later, huge blows to Iran's allies.
Putting Rapprochement on the back burner.
Completely. Plus the weakening of Hezbollah, the fall of Assad in Syria, major setbacks for the axis of resistance. Despite Iran's missile response against Israel, the overall impact on allies was significant. Creates this new, brutal balancing act for the regime, internal continuity versus external pressures.
It's fascinating, though, that beyond the politics, Khamenei have these literary interests, an avid reader.
Surprisingly deep intellectual interests, yes. Fascinated by Sartre, Bertrand Russell in his youth, praised Tolstoy, Victor Hugo called The Misérables the best novel ever written.
Misérables, Lao. And Steinbeck? Stowe.
Recommended Grapes of Wrath to writers, Uncle Tom's Cabin to managers, believing they shed light on social injustice, U.S. history. He's fluent in Arabic, Persian, Azerbaijani, translates books like Sayyid Qutb, even writes poetry under a pseudonym Amin, a more contemplative side.
That creates quite a paradox, doesn't it?
It really does, a fascinating glimpse into his complexity. On one hand, deeply well-read, diverse literature suggesting a broad mind. On the other, the same leader issuing strict fatwas like banning music education for kids, seeing it as harmful.
Intellectual curiosity alongside tight ideological control.
Exactly. That internal tension seems, in many ways, a defining characteristic of his long reign. Seeking intellectual breadth for himself, but demanding strict alignment with his interpretation of Islamic principles and revolutionary ethos for the society he leads.
So, looking ahead, his eventual departure, what are the implications?
It will undoubtedly be transformative for Iran. Profound implications for domestic stability, foreign policy, regional alliances. That brutal balancing act he maintained for over 3 decades, navigating dissent and pressure, it might soon end.
Setting the stage for major shifts.
Potentially significant, unpredictable shifts. Within Iran, across the Middle East, the succession question is the single most critical unknown for Iran's future.
So as the sun sets on this extraordinary, powerful leader's tenure, what future awaits Iran? And how will his enduring legacy, revolution, resistance, relentless power consolidation continue to shape the destiny of a nation truly at a crossroads, poised for an unpredictable new chapter? That's the question for you, the listener, to ponder. That was our deep dive into the life and legacy of Ali Khamenei. We really hope we've helped you unpack the many layers of this incredibly influential figure, provided some aha moments about Iran's complex political landscape, the forces that shaped it, and that intricate system of power that's defined it for decades.
Understanding leaders like Khamenei is absolutely key to understanding global power dynamics, especially in a region as volatile and, frankly, as strategically vital as the Middle East. We really encourage you, our listener, keep exploring, keep asking questions, seek out diverse perspectives, try to grasp the nuances of our interconnected world. Because these leaders, even the enigmatic ones, leave such an indelible mark on history.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We look forward to our next exploration with you.